Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Welcome back. We are picking up and filling in some details about our adenohypophysis. Remember, we said that the adenohypophysis is being regulated by the hypothalamus. We can think of the adenohypophysis as sort of our middle manager because it's very much in charge of turning on other endocrine glands. And so when we think about them as being called tropic hormones, or if you pay attention to tropin and tropic is very much in a lot of the names of these hormones, that's very much saying like turn on. And so if we do stop and pay a little bit of attention, we will see our name is giving us quite a bit of information here. So let's start with the adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is abbreviated capital ACTH. And this hormone, as the name sounds like, adrenocortex, is going to be targeting our adrenal gland, and specifically the adrenal cortex. So remember when we talked about the adrenal gland sitting on top of the kidneys, we see it's this small sort of triangular shaped gland, and we say that it's got this layer of tissue on the outside, sort of like the bark, and then we have this inner tissue, and we call the outer tissue the cortex and the inner tissue the medulla. And so it's the job of the adrenocorticotropic hormone to actually turn on the adrenal cortex. Okay. Sorry about that. We're going to be talking more about the adrenal cortex in its own video. So what we'll just say right here is we're going to get what are called corticosteroids being produced as a result of our adrenocorticotropic hormone. So we're basically turning on the adrenal cortex, and we're going to get a collective group of hormones referred to as corticosteroids. They're steroids, they're part of that lipid-derived group. Let's take a look next at our thyroid stimulating hormone, which is being produced again by the adenohypophysis, and its abbreviation is TSH. The thyroid stimulating hormone is going to be targeting and turning on the thyroid. The thyroid we're going to talk about in the future. So we're going to do videos for each one of these individually, but we'll see that this can lead to the production of what we collectively call thyroxins. And also we'll see the production of the hormone that we talked about in AMP1, calcitonin. The next one that we see here is the growth hormone, which is abbreviated GH. Now this one is going to have lots of different target tissues. So we're going to see it widespread. I'm just going to put here like skeleton, muscle, skin. It's going to trigger growth, right? So we're going to see increased mitosis coming from the growth hormone. We'll see growth hormone also increases what's described as lipolysis. So lysis means to break, and here we're specifically breaking down our lipids. So we're storing our lipids as triglycerides, and lipolysis means to go in and break that down into fatty acids. So that's releasing fatty acids into our bloodstream, which is going to be an important energy source. We can also see that you can use the glycerol from a fatty acid and use that to make glucose. So we'll see that important here as well. And we'll also stimulate, so I'm going to keep my increased arrow there, the liver to break down glycogen and to then release glucose. So again, with growth hormone, we're getting the release of both fatty acids and glucose into our bloodstream, which is going to be important if we're doing a lot of increased mitosis. With growth hormone, we'll also see that it's going to tell the liver to produce another hormone called somatomedin. And this one is going to act as a negative feedback. So what we'll see happening as your hypothalamus is going to produce the growth hormone releasing hormone. This triggers the adenohypophysis to make growth hormone. Growth hormone triggers the liver to increase production of somatomedin. So when you have a lot of growth hormone, you start getting rising levels of somatomedin. Somatomedin then is going to, when it's increased to a certain level, that's going to be the trigger for your hypothalamus to make the growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So increasing levels of growth hormone effectively then shuts off the production of growth hormone. So we'll see several examples of negative feedback mechanisms when we talk about regulating our hormones. As we finish up our conversation about growth hormone, notice then that the liver is an important target tissue there as well. Moving on to our prolactin. So remember, prolactin is being released in response to the prolactin releasing factor, or the PRF. And then we see that it will be inhibited by the prolactin inhibiting factor. Prolactin itself is going to be targeting our mammary tissue, so mammary glands. And here we're going to see that the prolactin is just going to stimulate milk production. We do see this is another example of a negative feedback mechanism, because as we increase our amount of prolactin, we see that that in turn is going to trigger the hypothalamus to make the prolactin inhibiting hormone, shutting down that stimulation. Finishing up our list that we have here, we see follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone both being released by the pituitary gland in response to the gonadotropin releasing hormone. Now, each one of these hormones is going to be targeting the gonads. We're going to see it targeting the gonads. And so I'm just going to collectively list that as my target. I'm having quite a lot of technical difficulty here with my equipment, so I apologize for all of those problems. The gonads are going to be collectively testes and ovaries. So we do see that there are differences in different bodies, whether you have whether you have testes or ovaries, but we do see the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone being produced in all body types. And we do see that it's going to trigger those gonads to produce either estrogens, progesterone, testosterone, and then we'll see inhibin as a hormone that's in common, regardless of whether you have testes or whether you have ovaries. We're going to pick up and talk about each of those sex hormones. So we think of these hormones here as sex hormones. We'll talk about these sex hormones more in their own video. Now, I mentioned to you that your adenohypophysis is producing 7 tropic hormones. And if you are counting on our list here, you see that I only have 6 that are highlighted for you. So we only have talked about the adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, growth hormone, prolactin, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. So that means we have a 7th one to pick up, and I'd like to just go ahead and grab that Let's take a look at that diagram that we labeled together where we first introduced the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And let's pay attention to that diagram specifically of the pituitary gland. And remember, we have the adenohypophysis as the anterior lobe. We have the neurohypophysis as the posterior lobe. And then we have this section of tissue in between that's referred to as the pars intermedia. And so actually this last hormone that I want to mention in this particular video is being produced specifically by the pars intermedia. And sometimes we'll see that it's listed as coming from the adenohypophysis when it's actually coming from the pars intermedia. And this hormone is called melanocyte stimulating hormone. Melanocyte stimulating hormone. And this one is abbreviated as MSH. MSH. And the MSH is going to be targeting melanocytes. And the melanocytes are those special cells, part of your integumentary system, that produce melanin. And what we see is the MSH will actually activate and increase melanin production. It's going to darken the skin. Now we see that there's also a local stimulation of the melanocytes when we're exposed to UV radiation. So we see this coming from the pars intermedia. It's kind of not fully well understood, but sometimes we will see this being triggered, for instance, during pregnancy. You can get some darkening of certain areas of the skin in response to this MSH that's being produced by the pars intermedia. So we can think about this as our seventh tropic hormone if you want, although remember, it's actually being produced from the pars intermedia and not the adenohypophysis. All right, y'all, stay tuned. We're going to look at some of these individual glands that we've mentioned, looking a little bit deeper at the hormones that they produce. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.